All right, hello folks. Good evening. I see lots of familiar names and some familiar faces on here as well. So hello friends and colleagues, and also hello to all the newcomers. It's great, as I was saying before we started recording, we had almost 60 people register for this event. So we will have some more folks trickling in slowly, but we're just going to go ahead and get started here. So my name is Katie Grillo, and I am the GIS Web Technology Specialist for the City of Cambridge, and I'm also your NEARC Board President. So I want to thank you so much for coming to our first virtual NEARC Community Workshop. As many of you already know, NEARC hosts 2 annual conferences every year. We have the one-day spring event, which is coming up on Tuesday, May 18th. And then we also have a 3-day conference every fall, which this year is scheduled for October 17th through the 20th. And we are hoping that we will be able to reunite in person at the Omni New Haven Hotel at Yale in New Haven, Connecticut. So we have these 2 major conferences, but these community events are designed to bring us together between those events. So we have had, and we will continue to have, these informal social mappy hours, which I know some of you have attended. So we'll continue to do those mappy hours, but we are also going to start hosting some workshops. And these workshops are designed to be a little bit more interactive. So they will include a short presentation of some sort, but then the goal is to really have more of a discussion and or hands-on activities. So for today's workshop, we wanted to honor Black History Month. And to do that, we are going to be exploring some of the history and then moving into the present and looking at where we can move forward from here. So February is Black History Month, but the work extends beyond just this one month, and we'll talk about that a little bit more as we wrap up our event. So for today, rather than having a presentation, we're going to watch a short film together, and this film is entitled Segregated by Design, and it examines the history of how our federal, state, and local governments unconstitutionally segregated every major metropolitan area in America. This was done through law and policy, but also through geography. So as GIS professionals, we certainly understand the power and the geography of maps, the power of geography and maps. However, we don't often discuss how geography and maps have impacted or shaped our country and its people. I'm joined tonight by Adam Krowski. He's the Director of GIS and System Analyst for the town of Arlington, Mass. And after the film, Adam is going to help lead us in a discussion where we take a geographic lens and apply it to some of the historical events that have occurred in our country. Adam, do you want to say hi? You're muted. It had to happen.
Good intro. Thanks, Katie. Hi, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity to join you, Katie, and NEARC's effort to celebrate Black History Month by diving into this fascinating intersection between segregation and geography. Thankfully for me, through the town of Arlington, I've been able to attend some trainings. One was called Race, Equity, and Leadership, training by the National League of Cities, and another training called White People Challenging Racism, Moving Talk to Action. And this workshop culminates in building your own anti-racist action plan. So fortunately for me, this effort supporting NEARC blends really well with my professional work and with my personal action plan that I created from these trainings. And I'd just like to recognize that I'm just at the beginning of my journey, but I'm very excited to be with you here tonight and to bring my energies to this event to continue this very meaningful work.
Yeah, thank you so much, Adam. I know that you have done a lot of work, but as you said, there's certainly more to do, right? And with that, we're gonna post up a quick poll. And this poll is really just to check in with folks to kind of get a sense of where people are coming from in terms of where they might be on their own journey. So the question is, have you explored learning opportunities such as readings, presentations, discussions that have helped you learn more about racial injustice, the history of racism in America, or similar topics? And as those poll results are coming in, just a quick disclaimer, as Adam said, I just want to make a note that he and I are by no means subject matter experts here. We're both still grappling with piecing together some of the history and how we fit into some of the systemic issues that are plaguing our country. And he and I have spent a lot of time talking about these topics over the last few months, both together and exploring them on our own. And so just looking at the poll results here, I can see that the vast majority of folks have indeed begun some of this work. And there's a couple of you that say that you haven't, and that's perfectly okay as well. You know, we're all on our own journey, and just excited to have all of you here together to kind of start to move forward. Adam, did you want to add anything there?
I think it's a great response. Yeah, looking forward to being a part of everyone's journey, no matter where they are right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And we do want to acknowledge too that these are difficult conversations to have, and they can indeed bring up a lot of emotions or confusion, feelings of denial or frustration. I know, and Adam expressed this to me too, that when we watched this video for the first time, it felt emotional. You know, there's a lot of information in this video, and we're not going to understand everything, but we can, and I urge you to do your best just to be open here. So the goal and the hope is to expand our awareness, to extend our understanding, and to open ourselves to the possibility of having this be a conversation and really have it be an ongoing opportunity within our community. So the goal is that we strive towards improving, starting with ourselves as individuals and members of this NEARC community, but then taking that into our homes and our own communities to help spread awareness and bring about change. So when we wrap up today's event, Adam and I are going to talk about a call to action. So what can you do and where do you go from here? All right, so with that, we are going to dive into the film. So it is 17 minutes long, but there is a ton of information packed into it. So as you're watching, I ask that you please try to focus on or pay attention to the role of geography and mapping. Think about how geography and maps have impacted or shaped our country and its people. I know that there's a lot to think about. There's a lot that we can sort of branch off to and explore here. But really, the focus of tonight's event is for us together to discuss how we as GIS professionals fit into the history and how we can expand our knowledge and understanding so that we can move forward together.
Okay, I'll share the video. If I could get a thumbs up when I play it, if folks can hear it, that would be great.
We're good.
In the middle of the 20th century, the city of St. Louis, Missouri, and the United States federal government condemned and demolished the neighborhoods in downtown St. Louis where African Americans lived, displacing thousands. They built the Gateway Arch. They built a university, interstate highways, hospitals, and middle-class housing that was unaffordable to the former African American residents. Those who were displaced then relocated to the few other places available, converting inner-ring suburbs like Ferguson into new segregated enclaves. We have been led to believe that racial segregation in housing was de facto segregation, by accident or the result of private prejudices. Yes, private prejudice clearly contributed to segregation, but by itself it could not have segregated the country without the intention of the federal government to segregate neighborhoods throughout the nation. If, however, we understand the accurate history, the history that was once well known but we've all now forgotten, that racially segregated patterns in every metropolitan area like St. Louis were created by de jure segregation, racially explicit policy on the part of federal, state, and local governments designed to segregate metropolitan areas, then we can understand that we have an unconstitutional residential landscape. And if it's unconstitutional, then we have an obligation to remedy it. The federal government in the New Deal of the Roosevelt administration of the 1930s pursued policies in the mid-20th century that segregated metropolitan areas. One important policy was the first civilian public housing program, which frequently demolished integrated neighborhoods in order to create segregated public housing. In the late 1930s, another New Deal program, the United States Housing Authority, was adopted. The very first projects built under the United States Housing Authority authorization were in Austin, Texas, because the most aggressive proponent of public housing at that time was the congressman from Austin, Lyndon Baines Johnson. And Johnson got the United States Housing Authority to put its first projects in Austin, separate projects for whites, for African Americans, and a project for Hispanics. The project for African Americans was placed in a location that the city plan of Austin had designated as a ghetto for African Americans. The United States Housing Authority and the local Austin Housing Authority demolished something called Emancipation Park, which was a celebrations location for the abolition of slavery. The design was to move all African Americans in the city of Austin into this community, whether in public housing or in private housing. The city of Austin then began to close schools for African Americans elsewhere in the city and close libraries and other public facilities to force African Americans to move to the east side. Another program that the federal government pursued to enforce segregation was the work of the Federal Housing Administration, the FHA, which subsidized the development of suburbs like Levittown, New York, on condition that they only be sold to white families and that the homes in those suburbs had deeds that prohibited resale to African Americans. The Federal Housing Administration's underwriting manual said that inharmonious racial groups should not be permitted to live in the same communities, meaning that loans to African Americans could not be insured. Government at all levels throughout the nation were involved in promoting and enforcing the restrictive deeds in homes and places like Levittown, and judges enforced the view that these deeds did not violate the Constitution because they were private agreements. Although white middle-class families that moved into suburbs like Levittown could buy property with no down payments if they were veterans and low-interest mortgages, middle-class African Americans had to make substantial down payments and get uninsured mortgages with higher interest rates. In many, if not most cases, African Americans could not get mortgages at all because the federal government would not insure them. As a result, they bought their homes on contract, like an installment plan where they accumulated no equity and could be evicted from their homes in the event of a single missed payment. Thus, contract buyers did not have the option of leaving a declining neighborhood before their properties were paid for in full. If they did, they would lose everything they'd invested in that property to date. The term redlining comes from the federal government's creation of maps of urban areas nationwide. And those maps were color-coded to indicate where it was safe to insure mortgages. Anywhere African Americans lived, even places where African Americans lived nearby, were colored red to indicate to appraisers that these neighborhoods were too risky for the FHA to insure. The FHA's justification was that if African Americans bought homes in white neighborhoods, or even if they bought homes near those neighborhoods, the property values of the homes they were insuring, the white homes they were insuring, would decline, and therefore their loans would be at risk. In 1940, for example, a Detroit builder was denied FHA insurance for a project that was near an African American neighborhood. He then constructed a half-mile concrete wall, 6 feet high and a foot thick, separating the two neighborhoods, and then the FHA approved the loan. In the 3 decades during which it administered this policy, however, the agency never provided or obtained evidence to support its claim that integration undermined property values. In fact, often racial integration caused property values to increase because African Americans' housing supply was so restricted and they had so many fewer choices. If African Americans had access to housing throughout metropolitan areas, supply and demand balances would have kept their rents and home prices at reasonable levels. Without access, landlords and sellers were free to take advantage of the greater demand relative to supply for African American housing. A 1946 National Magazine article described a Chicago building where the landlord had divided a 540-square-foot storefront into 6 cubicles, each housing a family. He had similarly subdivided the second story. Total monthly rent was as great as that generated by a luxury apartment on Chicago's Gold Coast along Lake Michigan. Such exploitation was possible only because public policy denied African Americans opportunities to participate in the city's white housing market. As the federal government concentrated low-income African Americans in single neighborhoods, the homes became overcrowded. Families had to subdivide their homes to make their mortgage payments or their property tax payments. Cities frequently withdrew public services from African American neighborhoods. They collected garbage less frequently. They didn't provide water and sewer services. Polluting industry and toxic waste plants were placed in African American communities in order to protect white neighborhoods from deterioration. The result was that African American neighborhoods frequently turned into slums. White homeowners looked at these places and assumed that slum conditions were characteristics of African Americans, not of government policy that forced this kind of overcrowding. White homeowners then became resistant to African Americans moving into their neighborhoods because they thought they would bring slum conditions with them. Of course, the slums were not created by the people. They were created by the forced concentration, the overcrowding in these neighborhoods. Blockbusting was a scheme in which speculators bought properties in borderline black-white areas, rented or sold them to African American families at above-market prices, persuaded white families residing in these areas that their neighborhoods were turning into African American slums and that values would soon fall precipitously, and then purchased the panicked white homes for less than their worth. Blockbusters' tactics included hiring African American women to push carriages with their babies through white neighborhoods, hiring African American men to drive cars with radios blasting through white neighborhoods, or making random telephone calls to residents of white neighborhoods and asking to speak to someone with a stereotypically African American name, like Johnny May. State licensing agencies that regulated real estate agents could have easily stopped this practice. All they had to do was to lift the license of 1 or 2 real estate agents who engaged in these practices, and the practices would have ended. While many de jure segregation policies aimed to keep African Americans far from white residential areas, public officials also shifted African American populations away from downtown business districts so that white commuters, shoppers, and business elites would not be exposed to black people. This was accomplished with slum clearance. One slum clearance tool was the construction of the federal interstate highway system. In many cases, state and local governments, with federal acquiescence, designed interstate highway routes to destroy urban African American communities. In the 1950s, there was a white middle-class neighborhood in Los Angeles that wealthy African Americans began to move into. It was called Sugar Hill. The first thing that happened was that the neighborhood association got together and tried to buy out the African American families who were moving in, offering them more money than the African Americans had paid in order to get them out of the neighborhood. When that didn't work, white homeowners tried to enforce a legal agreement prohibiting them from living in the neighborhood. And when that didn't work, the city council then decided it would be an African American neighborhood. It rezoned it for multiple family housing. It eventually became a slum. And then the Santa Monica Freeway was built to clear that slum to destroy the neighborhood. So these policies all worked together in an unconstitutional fashion to segregate Los Angeles. In 1957, Bill and Daisy Myers were able to purchase a home in Levittown, Pennsylvania, the Levitt Company's second large development. When the mail carrier discovered that he was delivering mail to an African American family, he let everyone in the neighborhood know, and as many as 600 white demonstrators soon showed up in front of the Myers' house, pelting the family and their home with rocks. Law enforcement stood by as this happened. For 2 months, rocks were thrown, crosses were burned, the Ku Klux Klan symbol was painted on the wall next door. Some policemen stood with the mob, joking and encouraging its participants. One sergeant was actually demoted to patrolman. because he objected to orders he had been given not to interfere with the rioters. In 1951, World War II veteran Harvey Clark, his wife Janetta, and 2 small children rented an apartment in all-white Cicero, a suburb of Chicago. When the Clarks refused to leave, a mob of 4,000 rioted, raiding the apartment, destroying the fixtures, and throwing the family's belongings out the window onto the lawn where they were set ablaze. Time magazine reported that the police officers present, quote, acted like ushers politely handling the overflow at a football stadium, unquote. The only people at the grand jury indicted were Harvey Clark, his real estate agent, his NAACP attorney, and the white landlady who rented the apartment to him, as well as her attorney, on charges of inciting a riot and conspiring to lower property values. Stories like this were commonplace, and state-sponsored violence was a means, along with many others, by which all levels of government maintained segregation. Today, African American incomes are about 60% of white incomes. But African American wealth is about 10% of white wealth. Most middle-class families in this country gain their wealth from the equity they have in their homes. So this enormous difference between a 60% income ratio and a 10% wealth ratio is almost entirely attributable to federal housing policy implemented through the 20th century. African American families that were prohibited from buying homes in the suburbs in the 1940s and 50s, and even into the 60s by the Federal Housing Administration, gained none of the equity appreciation that whites gained. Across the country in new developments, these homes in the late 1940s and 1950s sold for about twice national median income. They were affordable to working-class families with an FHA or VA mortgage. African Americans were equally able to afford those homes as whites, but were prohibited from buying them. Today, those homes sell for $300,000 to $400,000 at the minimum, 6 to 8 times national median income. The white families sent their children to college with the wealth they gained from appreciating home equity. They were able to take care of their parents in old age and not depend on their children. They were able to bequeath wealth to their children. None of those advantages accrued to African Americans who, for the most part, were prohibited from buying homes in those suburbs. So in 1968, we passed the Fair Housing Act that said, in effect, okay, African Americans, you're now free to buy homes in the suburbs that had been forbidden. But it's an empty promise, because those homes are no longer affordable to the families whose parents or grandparents could have afforded them when whites were buying into those suburbs and gaining the equity and wealth that followed from their purchases. Consider children who come from families where they're economically stressed, or in poor health because they have no access to good health care, or because they live in polluted environments. When they do come to school, for example, they may suffer from asthma because of that pollution and are drowsy from being awake at night, wheezing. They cannot then typically achieve at levels of children who come to school well-rested. When you concentrate children like that in single classrooms, it's impossible for teachers to develop the kind of outcomes that they can in middle-class children who come to school healthy, unstressed, and able to pay attention to schooling. What economists know is that African American children from low-income families who grow up in segregated neighborhoods are less likely as adults to move into the middle class than are African American children whose families have the same low incomes, but who live in integrated neighborhoods. So segregation itself impedes intergenerational mobility and perpetuates, rigidifies the inequality that we experience. Another thing that social psychologists have discovered is that decision-making is hampered when you don't have diverse decision-making groups. These psychologists have done experiments where they put people together to solve problems in both diverse groups and in segregated groups. And the diverse groups are much better able to solve problems because they challenge assumptions much more than the segregated groups do. So segregation impedes our political and economic success. We have 3 provisions in the federal Constitution that prohibit the kinds of actions that federal, state, and local governments pursued to create residential segregation. One is the 5th Amendment, which requires the federal government to treat all citizens fairly. Another is the 14th Amendment that requires state and local governments not only to treat citizens fairly, but to treat them equally. And then the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery, also requires that we banish the effects of slavery, which Congress long ago determined was any form of second-class citizenship. So in fact, the prohibition on African Americans to purchase homes in federally subsidized white communities or the segregation of public housing created a form of second-class citizenship which was a violation of the 13th Amendment. We cannot reverse de jure segregation mainly with lawsuits. We must also build a national political consensus leading to legislation, a challenging but not impossible task. Our focus now should be to develop policies that promote an integrated society, understanding it will be impossible to fully untangle the web of unconstitutional inequality that we've woven. To begin, we should first contemplate what we have collectively done and, on behalf of our government, accept responsibility to fix it.
So, a lot to unpack there. A lifetime of information, really, that we could talk about. And tonight we'll just focus on a few small segments of that. But I want everyone, or encourage everyone, to just take a moment and take a few breaths to let the wealth of information in that video kind of set in, and let whatever feelings you have might be stirred from that video, just let them in. And take a few breaths with me to allow yourself to kind of relax into all of that information. I know for some of you, it might have been the first time some of that information has been presented, and it is a bunch of heavy topics. So I just want to recognize that this video is designed to raise our awareness of unjust government practices. So if you are feeling some emotions, that's part of the intent. And with those emotions, we can then turn that energy into a force for good. So one thing I'd like to do to kind of take the temperature of the room is open a chat storm. So if you could open your chat window and share anything that resonated with you or a key takeaway in a short sentence or two so that we can get some feedback from folks. That would be great. I'd love to see the messages as they come in. Frustration. Yep. Anger. Yep. Go ahead and share emotions or thoughts or anything that came up for you during the video. It might be hitting you now. Discomfort. Yes. Thank you, Liz. The government sponsorship of violence is stunning. Should be required watching for all US citizens. The closing sentence really spoke to me. Learn and understand what we've done and accept responsibility and fix it. Especially with GIS, I think we can do a lot to understand the past and how to make changes. That was a lot. Yeah, it will take a lot to undo. It will take a lot to just realize and let it set in with us. And yes, of course, taking action to undo it. I read, let's see, Richard Rothstein's book on which this video is based, The Color of Law. Totally worth it. So recommendation from Karen to read the book, The Color of Law. The unfairness of this is obvious, but what is even more frustrating is the lack of education for everyone to know this. Thank you for that. Yeah, that's why we're here today. And you know, a big part of taking action is showing up. And you've all shown up today. So thank you very much for taking that time and that effort to just show up. How was this allowed to happen? I'm from Levittown, PA, but well, after the rocks were thrown, still it was very white. Thank you, Doug. The 1619 project is a must read. The power of the highway network through cities should definitely be taught more. Yeah, definitely geography related too, and that's a discussion piece for us. So thank you. Continue to share those thoughts and feelings as you wish. We'll likely be saving this chat too. I think there's just a lot of powerful information that we can share with one another. So a few things that I'd like to add. Our next part of this workshop will be a discussion, and we'll put you into breakout rooms. Katie will describe this a little bit more, but I kind of wanted to frame that discussion. Some of my takeaways, having seen this video a couple times, is that there's two major themes that I would like you to consider as you continue to develop your ideas around this in the breakout rooms. One is the system, which is a human constructed set of rules that we live within, which include the Constitution and other government policies. They were originally designed by white males to offer certain privileges to themselves and to other white male landowners, while clearly oppressing others. And again, this is a heavy idea to ruminate on, but this is one aspect, which is the system. And the second idea that I take away from this video is the connection with geography and the role that geography plays within that system by using mapping or other geographic information or other means to divide people in neighborhoods, to locate infrastructure projects in specific areas, to delineate areas where activities can occur or might be restricted. Then once these things occur, we learn about these areas and start to perceive them in certain ways in our own reality. And one example that really resonates with me is going to look for a home to buy or rent. And someone may say to you, well, that's a nice neighborhood, or you don't want to live in that area. And just this, there's so many layers to that, and geography plays such an important role to bringing these ideas into our reality. So in our discussion, just keep these components in mind to raise your own awareness of your thoughts and feelings. Katie?
Yeah, thank you, Adam, and thank you everybody for sharing your comments to the chat. As Adam said, we encourage you to keep posting things to that as well. But what we're going to do now is dive into the discussion piece. So we are going to use breakout rooms for this, just so that it can feel a little bit more intimate, and make it a little bit easier for folks to actually have a discussion. So we're going to set up some breakout rooms that will be about 5 to, let's see, how many people do we have? Yeah, let's do like 4 or 5 people each, maybe, Adam.
Okay.
And in those breakout rooms, we're going to ask you to focus on 2 major takeaways here. So I will post those 2 questions to the chat. But the first one is to think about how geography and maps have impacted or shaped our country and its people. So that's the first prompt. And then the second one is sort of what topics around geography and maps have, what topics are you curious about in your community or place of work? And specifically think about those in relation to segregation or other social justice themes. So we'll put you into these breakout rooms for about 10 minutes. And then after that, we'll come back together again for a few other things. All right. We'll just give Adam a second to set those up. Thank you. And I'll post these 2 questions. I'll be able to broadcast them out to you all. Hi, everyone. All right, we see folks trickling back in here. I know that that 10 minutes went by fast, right? It felt a little too short, but as we said, this is all designed to kind of be the beginning of a conversation for all of us, and to make space for these conversations in our community. So give folks, let's see, is everybody back? Yeah. All right. So, Adam, are you there?
The mute got me again.
So Adam, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and
Great.
give us a recap.
So now we've watched the video, we've raised our awarenesses, we've chatted in small groups, and now we'd like to take a little action and capture your thoughts from the movie and from the breakout rooms in a shared Google Doc, as we hope that this experience might be a catalyst for a future project idea. I know we had some future project ideas in our breakout group. They were awesome. And I'm inspired just by hearing people already thinking about these topics. So maybe this will be a catalyst for a future project idea, a future discussion with a colleague or anyone, or even a future NEARC conference presentation. So this document is part of what we're calling our call to action to get us brainstorming ideas, to focus your geographic lens as you apply these concepts to your life and to work. And we've put a few examples in here. The first two in there are Katie's and mine, and I'll just explain mine a little bit. I had a request recently for a zoning analysis at work. I work in local government, and they wanted me to analyze the impacts of a zoning change in town. And it was pretty specific. And as I went through the process, having seen this video, having thought about social injustices from what I've learned, I realized that no matter what the zoning impacts were, they might impact, what the zoning changes were, they might impact certain areas and certain people unjustly or unfairly. So I added 2 data layers to the analysis on my own volition. One's called the environmental justice areas, and the other one is a community development block grant area. And both of these areas highlight historically underserved populations. And this brought a different lens to the planning department's review of this project and these parcels. And so we put this in the document here so that others could see it and we could share it and people could maybe use these ideas. But we'd love for you to add to this document any things you're curious about, like you discussed in the breakout room. And then as you move to the right, you can kind of develop that idea a little bit more. Katie, have we shared
Thank you, Adam.
document?
So starting, can everyone see my screen? Guess I should have asked that before. But so column A here, so I put the document into the chat, and this is something that we'll have open and available to you after tonight as well. So column A is where you can just kind of start to put some of your ideas for like topics and things like that. And so hopefully column A is a little bit easier for you to try to think of something that you can put in here. And then the goal is to kind of make your way along the spreadsheet. So once you have that sort of topic, then can you imagine a sort of project with it, like what Adam said for his example? And then how do you move forward with that in terms of formulating methodology? We did put some details at the end of this document too, just for like where your project is located or what city, town, or state it's associated with, and then you can also put in your name and more details if you're willing to share this. We put this little like upvote column in case people start to see other projects or ideas that they're interested in, then they can kind of upvote those to see if maybe what we can do moving forward with these community workshops is maybe focus on some of these projects and ideas that we have in this call to action sheet here. So, all right. And with that, we are going to start to wrap things up. Time went by very fast, but I want to appreciate, or excuse me, I just want to say that I really appreciate everyone showing up tonight. I think that in a lot of ways, us showing up is really the first step. And it was great to see from our poll results how many of you have already begun showing up to some of these events and attending some workshops and things like that. So I encourage you to keep attending and to keep talking and keep working on yourself and keep focusing on these topics. And on that note, I do want to announce that we do have another upcoming NEARC community event. So as you all saw this page in order to register for the event, but we do have a list of our upcoming NEARC community events. So right now we have another one posted that's coming up on March 24th, and this is entitled Census Essentials for GIS Professionals, Understanding ACS and Decennial Data. And this workshop, we are going to delve into data.census.gov to learn how to retrieve some of this data. And then we will continue the exploration of how we as GIS professionals can use this data as a baseline for greater understanding and to bring about more awareness and engagement in our communities. We also are excited to have a little save the date coming. We have another event that we're working on for April where we will be chatting with someone from the University of Richmond, and they're talking about some redlining maps, and that will be a hands-on workshop as well, where we'll have the opportunity to dive into some of this historical redlining data and download that data and pull in other information from the Living Atlas on ArcGIS Online and see if we can create some maps together through that. So really all of these workshops are designed to try to keep these conversations going and make space for these topics to be addressed within our community. So thank you all so much for coming and for just showing up today, and really appreciate that. Adam and I are going to stay on the line for a little bit longer if folks want to stay and chat about anything. Adam and I both said that our virtual door, so to speak, is always open. So if you do want to talk about any of these topics, or if you have ideas for future presentations, workshops, we also will be announcing the call for abstracts for the upcoming spring event. So don't forget, you can also submit abstracts and presentations for that event as well. So thank you all so much for coming, and look forward to connecting with you again soon.
Thank you guys. Really appreciated the Zoom demo as well. Lots of nice features you guys pulled in.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Katie and Adam. This was awesome.
Yeah, thanks for coming, Michelle. Good to see you.
Thanks
You
for
too.
coming.
See you next time.
All right.
Great.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you, David. I was looking at the clock. I was worried we would run over if
It's okay.
but thank you for coming. Yeah, very excited for your spotlight next month.
Okay, we'll make it work.
Absolutely. It's going to be great.
All right, have a good night.
Thanks
Good
a
night.
lot.
Hi, Claire. Thank you.
Bye. Have a good evening.
Adam, we can stop the recording. I realized I didn't actually